Hi, I'm Monica. I like to draw, I like to paint, I like to animate, and today I have decided to start my YouTube channel. So, welcome! So basically I've created this channel because I am a self-taught artist. I have learned mostly through books, online resources like YouTube, this online platform called Schoolism that I really like, and I've taken some figure drawing classes here and there, but very ad hoc. And right now I've done a lot of studies and I've done a lot of little drawings here and there, but nothing's in one cohesive space. It's always on little pieces of paper, post-it notes, files on my computer, files on my iPad. It's very scattered, and I guess, like, for lack of a better word, I'm kind of like a art squirrel where all my pieces are like acorns that I hide everywhere, and I don't want to be like that. I want to be more organized. So I'm starting this YouTube channel as an attempt. And also, I think it would be really cool to be able to share my work online and kind of get feedback from other people and see what other people are up to, because when you go to art school you get feedback, you get critiques from other people.
Oh bro, this guy stinks!
And that's something I feel like I'm missing, is like critiques, so I can know how I can improve and then see what other people are doing. And I thought this would be a great way to do that, and I think it's a good way to hold myself accountable, because I will sometimes just totally forget. So my goal for this channel is to create a series of artworks or studies, and then each video would be through the lens of focusing on one fundamental. So for example, like lighting, color theory, or like things from animation like squash and stretch. Just like each video focuses solely on one fundamental, and then I kind of share the insights that I've learned focusing on this one fundamental, that I've learned from books, you know, that I learned from the various resources. Maybe it could be useful to someone else, but it also for me serves as kind of like my digital notebook where I write all my notes on what I've learned. So that's what I want to do. Fingers crossed that this isn't just some one-off thing. So to start this series off, I'm focusing on neutral lighting. So specifically overcast, neutral, diffused lighting. And so this doesn't seem like it's actually that interesting. Like, there's way more dynamic situations out there. But the reason I'm starting with this type of lighting is because when you're painting any type of lighting, you have to understand the interaction between the material and the lighting. So like a plastic object and a metal object won't react the same way when a light hits it. And the advantage of starting with neutral lighting is that you can focus on understanding the materials without having to worry about any special lighting scenario. And so just to get a general overview of what neutral, overcast, diffuse lighting looks like, you can start by looking at this sphere under direct sunlight. You can see how there are distinct areas of light and shadows, and the area where the sunlight hits is bright and has a strong highlight, where the opposite side is much darker. And the contrast creates this kind of sharp division between light and dark, and that's pretty characteristic of direct lighting. And so now you can imagine that there's clouds covering the sun. The clouds scatter the sunlight and they spread it evenly across the sky. So as a result, when we look at the same sphere, the shadows are much softer and much less defined, and the light kind of wraps around the object and reduces the harsh contrast and gently lights all the sides. And so this is what's called neutral diffuse light. So it's as if the whole environment becomes this kind of giant softbox and evenly distributes the light. So Claude Monet actually illustrated this softbox effect when he painted his series of this cathedral in Rouen, France. So even though the gray here is slightly exaggerated, you can still see how much more diffused the light is in his overcast painting compared to the other lighting scenarios that he uses. This kind of lighting is called neutral because it doesn't alter the colors in the scene as much as other types of lighting might, so it provides a very true to life rendition of the colors. For this first video, I'm focusing on creating a painting with this neutral diffused light scenario so that later in future videos I can add other more interesting lighting scenarios to the painting. And so with that being said, let's get started. So at the time I started working on this painting, it was winter in Paris, so finding an overcast day wasn't actually that hard to come by. Now it's summer in Paris, so yeah, making a video of your face is really stressful, so I got too camera shy. So I was just looking for reference, and I walked around the city on a gray day looking for things that would inspire me. I got my husband Justin to follow me around on his phone, filming me. And then I took a lot of pictures of birds. I've always liked taking pictures of birds. My Instagram is mostly just birds in Paris. I also really like pigeons. I think they have a lot to offer and are not valued by society. But this isn't that deep. So I just thought this picture of a park bench with these 3 pigeons below it were really cute and nice. And so that's the reference I settled with. And then I got to work on my iPad. My next step in this process was sketching out the scene. And in this phase, I focused mainly on getting the big shapes blocked in. I'm really focusing on getting it to look like the reference image as much as possible, like in terms of composition right now. And I'm also making sure that the trees are more or less in perspective in the background. And the one thing I do change is that I make the park bench come a little closer to the viewer, and I also make the pigeons slightly bigger because I want the pigeons and the park bench to be the main focus of the painting. And so once I'm done with that, then I move on to the color blocking phase. And also, like, none of these phases are fully linear. Like, I go back and forth a lot, but like this is how I've categorized them. But yeah, so in this phase of color blocking, I'm getting these big shapes filled in with their local color. So local color is important. It reflects the characteristics of the materials we're painting, right? And you can think of local color as the way you would color an object in a coloring book. So like you saw a banana, it would be yellow. Apple, it would be red. Like an orange is orange. That's the idea behind local color. And to understand why this is happening, you can think of this photo of a red apple. So on the left, you have the original photo. And then on the right is the same photo, but influenced under a red, a blue, and a green filter. But no matter what filter you apply, we still perceive this apple as being red. Even though technically some of the colors are more purple, they're more dark green, they're more brown. But then you could ask, why does our brain pick red for an apple, orange for an orange, yellow for a banana, blah, blah, blah. So basically, in order to not be overwhelmed by the world, we perceive the local color of an object as the color it would be when it's under white light. So this guy, Sir Isaac Newton, discovered that white light is actually a spectrum that corresponds to the frequencies of what we know to be as the colors of the rainbow. And so when a white light hits an object, the object will absorb some colors and then reflect other colors. So in this example of this pure red apple, the apple under white light absorbs all the non-red frequencies and then reflects the red frequency to the eye. Now that we understand what local colors are, I am now trying to apply those principles to this painting. So I'm making these trees like this brown color, this bench like this darkish green color, and the pigeons like a grayish blue. And if you notice in the reference picture, there is a little bit of sunlight peeking through. So what I do to counter that is I make everything just a little bit more blue, a little away from the oranges on the color wheel and a little bit more towards blue. And since my goal here is to really focus on understanding the properties of neutral light, I'm trying to really reduce and make the highlights a little more subdued. And now I start blocking in the details of the pigeons, so like that kind of greenish color of their feathering, and I'm trying to add a little bit more texture here, making things come a little more to life. And then I'm just kind of going back and forth between the different main elements. I did get rid of the green structure on the left because I thought it broke up the composition, and I really want the focus to be on the pigeons and the park bench. And when there's too much going on, then nothing becomes important. So I'm trying to like keep that in mind, because that's something I have a problem with. I want everything to be important, but that's not how life works, guys. And I need to get better at that. In this next part, my goal was to focus on getting the basic shading down based on what I saw in the reference. But then at this point, I was getting really frustrated, and so I started winging it, but like I didn't really have any rhyme or reason to doing what I was doing. So I'm only putting this in the video because some good things did come out of it, and I want to leave it in for the sake of transparency, because, you know, maybe I'll watch this later and be like, oh, like I understand why I did what I did, or I didn't understand what I did. You know, it's part of the growing process, so I'm keeping it in. So I guess if I had to describe specifically what I was doing, is that I was just trying to see if I could get more texture on the ground and playing with the saturation sliders to see if anything good would come out of it. I do think that the ground looks better than it did before, and I did end up removing the background trees from the composition. I think it looks better that way, and I only kept the tree silhouette that's like in the far background, just so that there's more of a clear distinction between foreground and background. And so then, because I'm just spending way too much time on this part, I stopped because otherwise I would have just literally gone on forever trying to just play with the hue and saturation sliders. And the goal wasn't to create a perfect piece. The goal is to just learn something from this. So I decide that I have to move on. So the next part that I'm focusing on is getting the shading finalized. And to do this, I'm really focusing on what I've learned in a schoolism class by Robert and Dice Tutsumi. And what they really highlighted in this class was the importance of focusing on having soft cast shadows and clear, sharp contact shadows, or in other words, like kind of this ambient occlusion. So just to explain what cast shadows are, they're basically the shadows that objects throw onto surfaces when light is blocked. So like this, for example, like when I put this here, you can see that there's like a shadow behind it right here. Yeah, is a cast shadow. And when we talk about soft cast shadows, you can think of a shadow that you see on a cloudy day, or a shadow from a street lamp, or on a foggy night. And basically these shadows aren't sharp or clearly defined. So the edges, they're more fuzzy, they're more gradual, and the softness happens because the light source doesn't come from one single point, but rather it's spread out. And when I'm shading, I'm focusing not only on getting the softness of the cast shadows, but also making sure to get bounce light. And so bounce light, how can I explain bounce light? I'll be right back. I'm back. So bounce light happens when light hits an object, this book, and then the object that it hits, this book, reflects on to the shadow of another object, Mozart. And so you can see, if you color pick, if this camera is doing its job, that Mozart's shadow is now influenced by the red of this book. That's bounce light. And that's what I'm also going to apply in my painting. And so to incorporate bounce light into my painting, I'm mixing in a little bit of the green from the park bench into the shadow, the cast shadow of the park bench, and then the gray blue into the shadows from the pigeon, and then the same for the trees. And so once I think that looks good, I move on to focusing on finalizing the contact shadows. And so the way to describe the contact shadows is also the way I understand ambient occlusion. And so I believe both of these terms are used to refer to when two geometries of an object touch. And so it's creating kind of these crevices where any kind of light cannot hit. So they're just like the darkest possible values. and I'm focusing on making sure that these are super dark to indicate that there's no light hitting it. So I do this specifically for where the park bench touches the ground, where the pigeons' feet touch the ground, and the trees touch the ground, and then also where that little sidewalk path thing touches the mulch, and basically just all the other geometrical forms on this park bench. I tried to make them just a little bit darker, and the way I do that is I selected them with the lasso tool, and then I decreased the brightness. And then also, I'm not ever entirely sure when and when not to increase the saturation. So I did increase the saturation. And also for the cast shadows, I did the same thing. I just decreased the brightness, increased the saturation. I don't know if this is always right to do. This is something I'm looking into. But that's what I did for this specific painting. The last step is finalizing the composition. And the reason I wanted to do this was because I felt like the painting was a bit too flat. I felt like, yes, it looked like it incorporated the elements that I learned, but it didn't feel cohesive as a painting together. So what I did to fix this was I overlaid a saturation layer just so I can see what the image would look like in black and white. And what I found was that the values were a little too grouped together. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to change the exposure such that I really focus on getting the details in the darker values and then like grouping the light values together. So in order to do this, I added a layer of atmosphere in the back so that everything in the background looks a bit lighter. And I also decided that, so that everything in the background looks a bit lighter and that the foreground stands out more in comparison. And I also thought that the tree kind of looked like the painting looked a little bit stiff. So with the liquify tool, I wanted to make everything come closer together. So I just drew a circle in the middle of my painting, and I wanted to see if I could get all the elements of my painting to kind of follow that circle. So I used the liquify tool on the tree to make it go closer towards the bench. I also brought that rogue pigeon on the right closer to the bench, and I decided that maybe I could use that tree silhouette in the background to be a leading line. So I softened it and made it go toward the corner of the bench. I also blurred out the details in the background. I just thought they were a bit too distracting, and also they contrasted a bit too much with themselves. So there's too much detail and it was taking away the focus from the point of the piece. So I blurred it out. And so at this point, I've decided that I am done with the painting. I think it looks, honestly, I think it turned out pretty good for just a study on overcast lighting. I don't think it's my favorite thing that I've ever done. I think I did learn a lot from it, and I'm planning on using this painting as a base for other videos where I do more interesting, more dynamic lighting scenarios and practice designing with light, kind of to create different types of stories behind the painting. And if that's something that interests you, then you can follow along. And if you think that there's anything I could have done differently, please let me know. And yeah, with that being said, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Football!